Well, today we are actually doing a podcast on Thanksgiving Day, and we just want to say happy Thanksgiving to anybody who may be listening.
Happy Thanksgiving. We are the Bible guys today.
Well, hey, today is supposed to be aired on Thanksgiving Day.
That's right.
Even though we're not filming it on
Right.
Thanksgiving Day.
What?
Right?
Yeah.
What? You guys did it before? What? You know what? Thanksgiving, let's talk about it for a second,
Yeah.
right? So Thanksgiving, is it one of your favorite holidays?
Oh my gosh, it actually is. I always tell people this. I love Thanksgiving. I don't have to cook though, so I know a lot of people have to cook and clean all that stuff. But for me, I go to my parents' house.
Yep.
And I'll eat food. I watch football.
Watch the Lions lose?
Yes, watch the Lions lose. Yep.
Yep.
I think about the Black Friday deals where I'm going to get my family members get those little ads you can go through or whatever. And honestly, usually that whole weekend is just fun for me. I just really enjoy it. So
yeah,
do you feel the same way?
And then of course the food is phenomenal.
Yes.
And I actually love. So sometimes I go into Cracker Barrel. And I've been in Cracker Barrel, by the way, in like 10 years. And then recently I've sort of rediscovered it.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
And so when you're driving down the highway, we're like, ooh, let's go to Cracker Barrel. But they have a Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh.
They actually, you can order stuffing, cranberry sauce, all that, turkey. And I'm like, I love that meal.
Okay.
And it's a sort of reserve for Thanksgiving, but at Cracker Barrel, you could have it any day of the year.
So speaking of stuffing and cranberry sauce, are we going to do do you want to do like a little holiday food bracket challenge?
Yeah, well, we actually did. We wrote it out.
All right, cool. Let's share it with everybody.
But you've not seen my bracket.
I have not seen his answers, but basically we did a holiday food bracket, and we just kind of want to hear from you again in the comments. Let us know what your favorites are, or if you agree with us on these things. Because if I know Chris, one thing I know about him is when he has something he's really trying to make a point. He has very strong opinions one way or the other. And so I really do want to hear your opinions on these things.
Yeah, you're going to laugh.
I'm going to laugh. Okay, so the first thing we have on here is between ham and turkey. I chose ham. He chose turkey.
Yeah, we're totally opposites on this.
And honestly, people always have the debate. I feel like that's like the debate people have about Thanksgiving. I'm definitely a ham guy.
Yeah, well, I love ham. Okay. I just love turkey on Thanksgiving.
See, I think we don't need to get into every single one. I think turkey is a little overrated to me.
Well, to be honest with you, my wife buys honey baked ham, which is the best ham of all.
My gosh, yeah.
And then she makes turkey, and sometimes I'll even go through an entire Thanksgiving and never even get the ham.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's unfortunate. All right, we're going down to the next one, which is between corn and green beans. Corn and green beans. Honestly, that's a close one for me. I actually took green beans. You took corn.
Well, number one, I don't love green beans. Mostly, I don't like them. And number two is I love corn with a passion.
So you love corn. Okay, so it's like passion. Okay, so just regular corn or corn with butter, sweet sweet corn.
I like all corn, honestly, frozen corn, whatever. But in mashed potatoes, I put it in the mashed potatoes.
Okay. We'll get to mashed potatoes in a minute. All right, you jump on the gun here. All right. The next one that we had between stuffing and cranberry sauce. This is funny because we actually, so far, 3 for 3, we actually have differing views. I pick stuffing, easy. You pick cranberry jelly? Really?
Yeah, so there's two kind of cranberry sauces. One is the bad kind.
Yeah.
And then one is the jelly. And let me tell you something right now. My wife knows that literally on Thanksgiving Day, because it happened one time.
Yeah.
If we don't have the cranberry jelly,
You lose your mind.
I lose my mind. It's not even a meal.
What made Chris mad last Thanksgiving?
So we actually have sent somebody to Kroger, which is open, unfortunately, right?
For them,
but fortunately for me, to get cranberry on Thanksgiving Day, because I will not even have the meal.
Wow. So I would be honest with you, of these 8 things that are on here, the 8 different comparisons we have, that's my least favorite cranberry. And it's your favorite. That's kind of funny.
It's my ultimate favorite.
Okay, that's
I love
surprising.
I'll go through an entire can of cranberry jelly just myself.
You just feel ill after? What's going on? You can't feel
I eat it with every bite. I eat it with everybody.
Oh, you're one of the... Okay, okay, got you.
I don't eat it like with a fork.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
I eat it with the meal.
I got to be honest, I've only had it one time ever. Last time. One and done for me.
Yeah, for me, it's everything.
So it's my least favorite. It's your favorite. Okay, so then we got mashed potatoes versus sweet potato casserole. And honestly, I like both of them. This was a hard one for me because it was a toss-up. It was hard to pick because these are 2 of my favorites. I actually chose a sweet potato casserole. You chose mashed potatoes, which again... 4 for 4, we were
every
different.
Day, all day, every day.
Mashed potatoes, love it.
Every day.
Okay, so then we're in the semifinals. It's between ham and corn. I chose ham over corn, and he chose corn over ham.
Yes.
So obviously a big corn. You already mentioned this. So I got ham in the finals. He's got corn in the finals. Then we go to the cranberry jelly versus the sweet potato casserole. I chose sweet potato casserole. You've already talked about your love.
Of course, I've chose the
Yeah, you already talked about your love for the cranberry jelly. But let me just say, sweet potato casserole. And the moment when I was filling out this bracket, I just thought about what, like, in the moment, I was like, what do I want to eat right now? Yep. And that's really what it was. At the moment, I'm like, what sounds good to me right now? And I just envisioned, my wife makes a sweet potato casserole that's like got some cinnamon in it. It's buttered up. I mean, it's like, it's good. And so at that moment, I took the sweet potato casserole to the finals, where I actually went against Mr. Zarbaugh's cranberry jelly versus my sweet potato casserole. I chose sweet potato casserole against ham, and then you chose cranberry jelly, which is just wild.
Yes. And then overall, I actually, the last choice for me was either corn or cranberry jelly, and I chose cranberry jelly because that beats corn. Yeah. So yeah, it sort of worked out weird for me. Yeah. But it's just all about priorities, is what I was thinking.
That's right. So your priority is that. For me, I couldn't go a Thanksgiving and not have a sweet potato casserole. If it was there and if it was on the table, I could not have that. Where you're the same way about cranberry jelly.
Listen, it's not as if I think cranberry jelly is my favorite food over these other ones. Here's what I'm saying. I viewed it through the lens of this. If you could take one thing away, okay, at Thanksgiving and me be okay with it, the absolute deal breaker is the cranberry jelly.
Okay. For me, I gotta have ham and I've gotta have sweet potato casserole. That's why they're in the finals. So
yeah. So hey, hopefully that was not too. Hopefully people are still listening.
Yes. Well, hey, you're eating somewhere. So actually, we just encourage you to, if you can, at some point in the day today, we have a website called thebibleguys.com. TheBibleGuys.com, very simple. Go ahead and go there. You can subscribe. You can see past episodes, all of that stuff. But it just helps us if you go subscribe there. That'd be awesome.
So we're going to dive into chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians, and we're going to be looking at how Paul talks about, really just foundation, really.
Yep. So we're going to get in verse 1. Like you said, 1 Corinthians 3, verse 1. It says this: Dear brothers and sisters, when I was with you, I couldn't talk to you as I would to spiritual people. I had to talk as though you belonged to this world or as though you were infants in Christ. I had to feed you with milk, not with solid food, because you weren't ready for anything stronger. And you still aren't ready, for you're still controlled by your sinful nature. You are jealous of one another and quarrel with one another. Doesn't that prove you are controlled by your sinful nature? Aren't you living like people of the world? When one of you says, I am a follower of Paul, and another says, I follow Apollos, aren't you acting just like people of the world? And in day 1 of this week, we actually talked about the idea of the compliment sandwich and how there's a compliment and the compliment at the end. In the middle is the hard truth. This is the hard truth part. He's laying it on there. He says, after all, who is Apollos? Who is Paul? We are only God's servants through whom you believe the good news. Each of us did the work the Lord gave us. I planted the seed in your hearts, and Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who's the watering. What's important is that God makes the seed grow. The one who plants and the one who waters work together with the same purpose, and both will be rewarded for their own hard work. For both God's workers, and you are God's field. You are God's building. Because of God's grace to me, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building on it, but whoever's building on this foundation must be very careful, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, which is Jesus Christ. Anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials like gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. But on the judgment day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. Don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God lives in you? God will destroy anyone who destroys this temple, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Stop deceiving yourselves. If you think you are wise by this world's standards, you need to become a fool to be truly wise. For the wisdom of the world is foolishness to God. As the scriptures say, he traps the wise in the snare of their own cleverness. Now, honestly, some of this stuff, if you were just tuning in here on Thanksgiving Day, some of this we talked about foolish things versus God's wisdom earlier on this week. So even if you want to go back and watch those, I think it would help because we're probably not going to touch on a lot of that today. But you notice at the beginning, Paul calls them infants. I'm wondering how they felt about that.
Yeah, I think you have more to read though.
Oh, I'm not. What? I keep doing this.
Verse 20.
Oh my goodness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise. He knows they are worthless. So don't boast about following a particular human leader. For everything belongs to you, whether Paul or Apollos or Peter or the world or life and death or the present and the future. Everything belongs to you. And you belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God.
There it is. But by the way, both times you stopped because well, no, it's only because it's sort of where the Bible indents everything because he's quoting the Old Testament, and in this case, he's quoting the book of Job, chapter 5, verse 13.
Yeah,
and so that's sort of it looks like a natural break.
Yeah.
That's why you did
My apologies.
Yeah, it's okay. So anyway,
infants at the beginning, though, I mean, that's got to be pretty savage, right? Or for them to be reading this, but he's just speaking that truth to them.
I mean, it may sound savage on the surface, but Paul is very accurate in telling them that, like, he's pointing out the fact that they're not mature,
right?
Because he's not insulting them. He's saying they're not mature in Christ. They're like infants. And then he goes on with that metaphor, and he talks about, I had to feed you with milk and not with solid food because you weren't ready for anything stronger. And then he goes on and he says, hey, doesn't this prove that you're acting like the world? Because you're sort of treating Apollos and Paul and everything else sort of like the world does, meaning like you're not mature in Christ. Yeah. You're not mature. You're acting like infants because that's the way that the world works. They want a king. The world wants a king.
That's right.
They want somebody to look up to. They're less interested in talking about Christ, and they're more interested in saying, we love Paul or we love Apollos, and he's the man. And he's like, no, man. He's like, we're both working together for the same purpose. And who are we? We're the same person. We've done different things at different times. And we have different personalities, but all of us are working to the same goal.
Yeah.
So the infant sort of sets the stage of Paul's metaphor as he is sort of trying to unpack the idea that that they're not acting the way that they should act.
Yes. To me, the part that always has stood out from this section of verses is when he talks about building a foundation and the importance of that. And I think that's really important. Anybody who knows about building foundations and that sort of thing understands the importance of that. And then, even Jesus himself earlier on, before this, he talks about the idea of building your house on the rock. His word, building your house on Jesus versus building your house on the sand, which can be taken up by the winds and the waves. I know for me, I actually had a period of time where last year, my wife and I were looking for a house to flip. We ended up flipping a house. And that was the one major thing that anytime I went to a contractor, they said the major no-no or the major thing you got to be careful of is the foundation of the home. Great. And we went into some houses that were pretty beat up to where you'd walk in and maybe the photos look good online. You walk in, I'm not even kidding. Have you ever been in a house where you walked in and you felt almost like dizzy because the foundation was so bad?
Yeah.
And like that would happen almost every time we'd go look at how, if we look at 5 of them, there would always be 1 or 2 where you'd walk in and you'd have this weird feeling of like, wow, I'm actually dizzy. And they'd say, well, it's usually a foundational issue. I've seen some where the wall, like you go down and the walls were just like caving in down the middle. And it's kind of, you just talking about the importance of what you're building your foundation on. And I think it's so important because that's like the most important thing. The foundation matters so much.
Yeah. And it's such a great example. And that's the reason why in the Old Testament, and also in the New Testament as well, Jesus even referred to the Old Testament talking about the cornerstone. And then, it was actually Peter who actually said Jesus is the cornerstone. He quoted the Old Testament, right, to the Sanhedrin. And he's talking about how Jesus is not only a part of the foundation, but he is the most important part of the foundation, right?
Yeah.
So he's the cornerstone that sets the foundation because you start with the cornerstone.
Yeah.
And so the foundation is Jesus Christ. And a lot of times, if you're in a marriage that is crumbling apart, and you've tried really hard to keep it together, you just have to look and ask the question, is Jesus Christ the foundation of that marriage?
That's good.
And if it's not, then that's the reason why.
Yeah.
Just like visually, you were able to see walls crumble and walls crack because the foundation is the most important part.
Yeah, it's almost like, honestly, in some of those situations I heard, a lot of times the contractors would say it's almost better to just tear it down and start over with the right foundation, which I think is also a great metaphor for, in a lot of things in life. It's like you almost have to just start from the foundation and work with it. And if your foundation's on Jesus, that's everything versus, trying to just make it work off of a bad foundation. So it's important.
And so, we sing songs like this to kids in children's church about building on the rock.
Ooh, you're going to sing for us?
No, I'm not going to sing for you.
Darn it.
But anyway, it's just that much of an important message. Let me talk about this for a second as well. So again, it's sort of the same theme where Paul is talking about no division among leaders, but at the same time, he does something different this time. He says, I planted the seed, and Apollos watered it, but it's God who made it grow. And I learned it, I memorized it in the KJV where it says God gives the increase, right?
Oh, wow.
For it's not important who does the planting and who does the watering. What's important is God's the one who makes the seed grow. And he says we work together for the same purpose. You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of that, like, God sent Paul there for a different reason that he sent Apollos. Yeah. So he says, I planted the seed, Apollos made it grow. What that means is Paul is a raging evangelist.
Right.
He's already pointed out the fact that he stripped away all of his knowledge because God has specifically sent him as his life mission to bring the gospel to those who are not Jewish, to Gentiles. That was his whole purpose. So he waltzes into a city and he says, this is the gospel. And then Apollos comes along and builds on that foundation. In this case, Paul says seed and watering. Well, listen, I have been in both situations where I have sort of invested in somebody, planted the seed, and saw no fruit. And then later on, we had a girl that came over as an exchange student, and she was not a Christian, and she stayed in our house for like a month. Wow. And we just shared the gospel with her, and she was not ready to receive Christ. And then later on, she writes to us from Germany and says, I accepted Christ.
That's amazing.
Because somebody else watered the seed that we had planted.
That's awesome.
And by the way, 20 years later, my daughter Sarah goes over to spend a semester in England and actually visits her in Germany.
That's cool.
And 20 years later, she hosts Sarah because she stayed in Sarah's room when she was little.
Wow.
How cool is that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. So some people plant seeds, some people water. It's not important.
Yeah.
Right. I've also
It's important to show that the different roles that people have. So you can't share your faith and feel like, oh man, like, like all of a sudden feel like, wow, that was a waste of time. No, you have no idea what God is going to do and how the story is going to turn.
Right, because you planted the seed, and God is going to probably bring somebody else along to water it, to reap the fruit. Yep. But that's okay, because both the planter and the water were both important. Yeah. And you've been on the receiving end too, where you've been in a spot where you've led somebody to Christ, and you're like, wow. Because somebody else planted that seed.
Yep, 100%.
Which is great.
So I want to ask you, because we wanted to try to keep this a little shorter because it's Thanksgiving Day. You guys want to get to the family, hangouts or whenever you watch this. I want to ask you, if you don't mind, do you notice, like, if obviously I mentioned this earlier, it's kind of a challenging topic of what Paul is bringing to the church in Corinth. This whole section, he's kind of like telling them, come on, this is the way we need to live. This is the way we need to change. What are some of the big misses you would say that the church in Corinth were experiencing that Paul was trying to expose? Is there any big misses that I think honestly could be warning signs for us because we want to avoid these actions ourselves as a church or as Christians?
Yeah, I would say that the main message that Paul is trying, you're trying to say, what were they missing at the point?
Yeah. What were they missing? What were the things that were?
Honestly, I would just say the bigger picture.
Yeah.
That to me feels like the first 3 chapters of Corinthians. Paul is trying to paint a big picture because they're getting involved in the details.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes, even if you think about church people like quarreling, right? They're missing the big picture.
That's a good point.
And sometimes when you get involved in politics, and you squabble over X, Y, and Z, you're missing the big picture that we're all Christians.
We're on the same team,
right? We're on the same team.
Yeah.
Let's look at the big picture here. What is the message we're trying to send to the world?
That is a really good.
I
feel like it's hard when you take something like this to actually summarize it that way and to say like the bigger picture. I think that's actually like a really good way of.
And I know we want to keep it short, although I don't think we're going to do that much shorter because I am compelled to say one more thing that I just can't breeze over. I think this is the very first time that Paul introduces the idea that we're the temple. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when he says, "Hey, don't you realize that you're the temple?" Keep in mind that they would not have thought of the Jewish synagogue. They would have thought of the massive temples in Greece. Yeah. They would have thought about the Parthenon in Athens, because after all, there's temples in Greece that were constructed like of Ares. That was in the Acropolis. Yeah. And actually, the Phidias was the sculptor who designed the Parthenon. And he was also responsible for many of the wonderful statues in the 5th century. And so, in the 5th century, that would have been right around the time because we believe that Jesus wasn't actually born at 0000. And so there's a lot of these huge temples, with great, things of beauty. And Paul is introducing the idea that we're the temple and that God no longer exists in a home, but he actually exists in our hearts, in our spirit, and we're the ones that house the power of God in us. And that's really a whole nother sermon altogether.
It probably blew their minds, I imagine, because you were saying there, when they think of the temple, they think of that. And he's like, no, you are the temple.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right. So anyway, yeah, we'll probably get more into that as we move on in Corinthians. We will wrap it up for now.
Yes.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And for today, we are the Bible Guys.
See ya.